Clara Redbird struck the mud hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. The tin beneath her arm flew open. Recipe cards scattered across the road in the cold spring rain, white scraps tumbling through hoof prints and wagon ruts. One landed face down in a puddle. The ink began bleeding before Clara could reach it. Nearly 20 men stood inside the gate of Red Butte Ranch. Not one stepped forward. Harlan Voss remained above her, broad as a barn door beneath his dark coat, his mouth bent with satisfaction. "I told you this is a working ranch," he said. "We don't feed fat strays." A few men laughed. Most looked at the ground. Clara pressed both palms into the mud. Pain burned through her knees, but humiliation hurt worse. She had walked nearly 10 miles through rain with worn boots, $4 in her pocket, and no breakfast since yesterday. The recipe tin was the last thing she owned that had belonged to her mother. She gathered the cards one by one. Her fingers shook when she lifted the wet one. Her mother's handwriting had blurred around the edges, but the words remained visible. "Make more than you think they need. Someone is always hungrier than you expect." Clara placed the card carefully inside the tin. Then she pushed herself upright. Mud covered the front of her dress. Rain darkened her braids. She did not wipe her face. Harlan glanced at her full figure and laughed again. Kitchen doorway might not be wide enough for all that pride. Clara met his eyes. "Then I reckon you had better widen the doorway." The laughter stopped. She walked back to the gate and turned toward the ranch house. Harlan waited, perhaps expecting her to leave. When she did not, his expression hardened. "You deaf? No. Then go. I came to speak with Mr. McCord. He doesn't speak to beggars. I'm not begging." Harlan stared at her a moment longer, then turned away. Let her freeze. The men returned to their work. Clara stayed. For 2 hours she stood in the rain while the mud dried stiff against her skirt. The ranch spread before her beneath a low gray sky, barns, corrals, a long bunkhouse, and cattle moving like dark shadows beyond the northern fence. Red Butte looked wealthy from a distance, but up close she saw sagging rails, broken shingles, and men carrying themselves as though every task weighed twice what it should. A rider approached from the corral. He was lean, dark-haired, and perhaps 30, with a calm face that revealed little. He held out a recipe card. "You missed this one," he said. Clara took it. "Thank you." His gaze moved toward the barn where Harlan had disappeared. "He punishes men who embarrass him. That why nobody helped?" The rider's jaw tightened. "Partly." "Fear explains silence," Clara said. "It doesn't make silence harmless." He accepted that without argument. "Joseph Little Bear," he said. "Clara Redbird." Something changed in his eyes at her name. "Your mother's people from the Tongue River country?" "Yes." He nodded once as though a question had been answered. Then he returned to the horses. The ranch house door opened shortly afterward. Silas McCord crossed the yard with the slow, measured stride of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He was tall, weathered, and graying at the temples. His coat was good, but the tiredness in his face was not. "You the woman who has been standing at my gate?" "Yes, sir." "Harlan says you caused trouble. Harlan pushed me into the mud." Silas looked at her dress, then toward the barn. "What do you want?" "The cook's position. We've had 3 cooks in less than a year." "I know." His eyes narrowed. "How men talk at freight stops. They talk in Miles City. They talk when they leave a ranch hungry and angry." Silas's expression cooled. "You think you understand my ranch because you heard stories on the road? I understand men who feel disposable. Cattle prices are down, freight costs are up. We lost stock through winter, that's why men leave." Clara looked toward the bunkhouse. A young hand carried 2 water buckets, a lawn, his shoulders bent beneath the weight. "A hungry man can work another hour, but a man who feels worthless will ride away before sunrise." Silas went still. Clara continued, "Bad food isn't the whole problem. It's the message. It says nobody planned for them, nobody noticed, and their labor matters more than their lives. That is a bold thing to tell a man on his own land. It's still true." Rain ticked against the brim of his hat. "What's in the tin?" "My mother's recipes, my aunt's too. You cook as well as they did? Better in some ways." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Confidence or foolishness, you can decide after supper. Silas looked toward the ranch house, then back at her. "Bake biscuits worth keeping before sundown, and you can stay until morning." Clara lifted her bag. "That will be enough." The kitchen was worse than she expected. Rancid lard sat beside damp flour. Spoiled salt pork hung near an open window. Grain sacks had been left unsealed. Grease blackened the iron stove, and the shelves were arranged so badly that no one could tell what was missing. Clara understood the room immediately. This was not simple laziness. Disorder had been made useful to someone. She rolled up her sleeves. Before she cooked, she cleaned. She hauled water, scrubbed the stove, shifted a heavy preparation table, threw out spoiled food, and sorted everything that could still be saved. Her arms ached, but she welcomed the ache. Work was cleaner than humiliation. Joseph appeared with dry wood and onions. "Harlan told us not to help you. He gave that order because he knows what happens when people start helping each other." Joseph set the wood beside the stove. They stopped being afraid one at a time. Together they worked without further conversation. Clara found sound flour, buttermilk, dried beans, smoked venison, coffee, and a few onions. From her bag she removed a small jar of chokecherry preserves. She opened the tin. Her aunt's biscuit recipe was written in a neat hand. Her mother had added a note beneath it. "Be gentle with the dough. Strength does not mean pressing harder." Clara mixed the flour and butter with steady fingers. She cut the dough, laid the rounds in iron pans, and slid them into the oven. The smell reached the yard before the bell rang. A young ranch hand appeared first. His name, Joseph told her quietly, was Ben Two Rivers. He stopped inside the doorway as though afraid the warmth might vanish if he moved too quickly. "Sit," Clara said. Others followed. When she placed the first basket on the table, the room became silent. Ben took a biscuit and broke it open. Steam curled upward. He spread chokecherry preserves across the soft center and took one bite. His face changed. Clara looked away before he had to hide it. Conversation began slowly. A comment about a horse. A complaint about the weather. Then, laughter rose from the far end of the table, rough and unfamiliar, as though the men had forgotten how it sounded. Silas entered without announcement. He stood beside Clara and watched his workers. "How long since they talked like this?" she asked. "A while." "The biscuits didn't make them lonely." "No, they only reminded them they didn't have to stay that way." Silas looked at her differently now. "You have the position. I need control of the kitchen supplies. You have it. And nobody moves food without telling me." His gaze shifted briefly toward Harlan, who sat alone at the end of the table. "Agreed." Clara carried a fresh basket toward him. Harlan had not touched his supper. She placed a biscuit directly in front of him. "Don't let it go cold." His eyes followed her as she walked away. After the men left, Clara opened the supply ledger. The flour listed on the last receipt was nearly twice what remained. One page had been torn out. She searched the stove ashes and found the blackened corner of a freight bill. The surviving numbers were enough. A shadow filled the doorway. Harlan stood there. "Cooks belong at stoves," he said, "not in account books." Clara held up the burned receipt. Spoiled food and missing money often come from the same kind of neglect. He stepped close enough for her to smell tobacco on his coat. "Keep baking, girl. Kitchens burn easier than barns." He left. A moment later, hoofbeats crossed the dark yard. Joseph appeared at the window. "Harlan only rides at night when he doesn't want Mr. McCord knowing where he went." Clara closed the ledger and placed the burned receipt inside her recipe tin. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we find out where he went." Before dawn, Clara stood beside the kitchen window and watched Harlan Voss ride back through the gate. He came from the east road, not the north pasture. Mud covered his horse to the knees, and a dark leather case was strapped behind his saddle. Harlan dismounted without noticing her, carried the case into the supply barn, and emerged empty-handed. Joseph Littlebear appeared from the shadows near the corral. "You see it?" Clara whispered. "I saw where he put it. Do not touch it yet." Joseph studied her face. Why not? Because finding a hidden box proves he hid a box. Finding where the missing food went proves something harder to explain. She returned to the stove before Harlan could see the kitchen light. During the weeks that followed, Clara made herself too useful to remove and too visible to accuse quietly. She rose before 4 each morning. Coffee boiled before the first riders came in. Biscuits browned while the eastern sky was still black. She counted flour weighed, salt pork marked every egg, and wrote each delivery in a small notebook she kept inside her apron. She also counted what no ledger recorded. Ben Two Rivers arrived every morning with cracked knuckles and the tired posture of a boy doing a grown man's labor. Amos Rourke favored his left knee, though he denied pain whenever anyone noticed. 3 men ate quickly and left without speaking. 2 had already packed part of their belongings beneath their bunks. Food opened them slowly. A warm plate made a man stay long enough to answer one question. A second cup of coffee sometimes brought the truth. Ben admitted he was repairing fences after finishing his horsework because Harlan had never replaced a hand who left in February. Amos confessed that his knee had swollen for months. Joseph revealed that deliveries usually came when Silas was away from the main house. Harlan signs for everything Joseph said one evening as he peeled onions beside Clara. Then he tells us the freight company sent less. Did you ever see where the rest went? Once. 2 crates were moved onto another wagon heading east. Why didn't you tell Silas Joseph's knife stopped? Harlan said he would accuse me of stealing a mare. A white foreman's word against mine would have been enough for most men. Clara looked at him. Survival can explain silence, she said, but it cannot be where the story ends. Joseph resumed cutting. Then where does it end? With someone speaking while there is still something left to save. Silas resisted her observations at first. When Clara told him Ben was doing 2 men's work, he said the boy had never complained. When a man believes complaining will cost him his wages, silence is not proof that he is well, she answered. When she told him about Amos's knee, Silas frowned. He says it is fine. He says that because he is afraid usefulness is the only reason he is allowed to stay. Silas spoke to both men. Ben's workload was reduced. Amos was moved from fence digging to harness repair. Neither thanked Silas directly, but Ben began laughing at breakfast, and Amos stopped gripping the edge of the table each time he stood. Silas also started eating with the men. He remained quiet at first, listening more than speaking. That alone changed something. The ranch hands sat straighter when they realized their employer knew their names, their assignments, and which horses they trusted. Harlan watched all of it. His resentment moved through the ranch like a cold draft beneath a closed door. Then, Lottie Freeman arrived from the Miles City Road with a wagon full of soap lamp oil medicine and dried fruit. She was a handsome black woman in her middle 30s, wearing a brown coat and a hat pinned firmly against the wind. She entered the kitchen, looked at Clara's organized shelves, and smiled. Somebody finally taught this room to stand upright. Somebody had to. Lottie noticed the burned freight receipt beside Clara's notebook. Clara showed her the numbers. Lottie's expression sharpened. I know this company. They deliver full orders to my station, not here. No. Lottie turned the paper over. And I know the man whose seal is stamped here, Franklin Hale, works for the Yellowstone Cattle and Land Company. Joseph looked up from the table. The syndicate, buying ranches east of Miles City. The same one, Lottie said. Hale has been meeting Harlan at my station for months, always after dark, always pretending they happened upon each other. Clara felt the pieces settle into place. Harlan was not merely stealing food. He was making Red Butte weak enough to be purchased. That night, Clara, Joseph, and Lottie compared every record they could find: freight dates, supply quantities, feed orders, kitchen inventory, Harlan's signatures. By sunrise, the missing goods amounted to more money than most ranch hands earned in 2 years. Clara carried the ledgers to Silas's office. He read them once, then again. "Harlan has been with me 5 years. The numbers have no memory of loyalty," Clara said. "He stood beside me when Robert died. And then he learned you were too tired to check what he placed in front of you." Silas rose and walked to the window. His face looked carved from old stone. Clara continued carefully. "He did not only take money. He kept your men hungry, frightened, and divided. He made them believe neglect was the natural order of this ranch." Silas turned. Clara held his gaze. "A ranch can lose cattle and live, but when it loses the people who hold it together, it is already dead." The words remained between them. Silas looked down at the ledger. "I will confront him in the morning." Clara wanted to tell him morning might be too late, but the grief in his face stopped her. He needed hours to understand that a man he trusted had been hollowing out his life. She returned to the kitchen. Before dawn, she opened the door and smelled sour milk. The flour sacks had been cut and soaked with water. Buttermilk sat warm beside the stove. Salt pork was gone. Her sourdough starter lay shattered across the floor. On the preparation table rested her mother's biscuit card, torn in half. Clara picked up the pieces. For one dangerous moment, she could not breathe. Then she placed them beneath an iron plate and began breakfast. She made cornmeal cakes, eggs, smoked venison, and dried apple porridge. Ben arrived early and saw the ruined shelves. "Who did this?" "Sit down." He did not sit. He moved beside the door and remained there while the men ate. Silas confronted Harlan in the yard. The argument did not become loud. Silas grew quieter with every denial. Harlan claimed the missing supplies were waste. Then he said the ranch owed him. Finally, he pointed toward the kitchen and accused Clara of poisoning Silas against loyal men. Silas answered, "She did not make the numbers, she only looked at them." Harlan was dismissed before 8. He rode through the gate with one saddlebag and no apology. Before turning east, he looked toward the northern pasture. Joseph saw it. By afternoon, the horses had grown restless. The wind vanished. A gray wall gathered beyond the buttes. "The sky is drawing breath," Clara said. Lottie stepped outside, then returned immediately. "Blizzard." Silas sent men to gather cattle and recall the line camps. Joseph and Ben rode north to inspect the fence. Clara filled every pot she owned. The storm struck after dark. Men stumbled into the kitchen, coated in ice. Clara fed them, counted them, warmed blankets, and kept coffee boiling. Amos returned with his knee swollen and tried to go back outside. "You will sit," Clara told him. "Men are still out, and they will need you able to walk tomorrow." He sat. Hours passed. Joseph and Ben did not return. Silas went searching. Near dawn, shouting rose above the wind. The door burst open. Joseph staggered inside, carrying Ben across his arms. Blood covered Joseph's shoulder. Ben's face was pale, his lips nearly blue. Clara swept the table clear. Blankets, she ordered. Lottie, warm broth. "Joseph, sit before you fall. Ben first." They stripped away the frozen clothing and wrapped the boy in heat. Clara held broth to his mouth and spoke steadily. "Ben, you are inside. You are warm. Stay with my voice." His eyelids moved. "You hear me?" After a long moment, he whispered, "I knew somebody would be waiting." Clara closed her eyes for one heartbeat. Silas entered, covered in snow and ice. He looked at Ben, at Joseph, at the men filling the kitchen, and at Clara standing over all of them. "You held it," he said. "We all did." "No." His voice was rough. "We came back because we knew this room would still be here when the storm weakened." Joseph opened his clenched hand. Inside lay a crescent-shaped horseshoe nail. The north fence was cut, he said. Before the snow, tracks led east. Harlan's horse wore crescent shoes. At sunrise, a well-dressed man rode through the damaged gate. He introduced himself as Franklin Hale and offered Silas enough money to buy Red Butte Ranch before noon. Clara saw the seal on his leather case. It matched the one on the false freight receipts. Franklin Hale entered the kitchen as though he already owned the room. Snow melted from the shoulders of his black coat and darkened the floorboards beneath his boots. He set his leather case on Clara's preparation table without asking directly beside the flour bin she had scrubbed clean after Harlan's sabotage. Silas stood near the stove, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee. Exhaustion had hollowed the skin beneath his eyes, but his voice remained steady. "You rode through a blizzard to discuss land." "I rode because storms make men practical." Hale opened the case. Red Butte lost cattle supplies and a foreman in the same week. Your debt was already known in Miles City. Yesterday's weather merely shortened the arithmetic. He placed a document on the table. The purchase price was large enough to clear every obligation Silas carried. There would be wages for the men, money left after the creditors were paid, and enough for Silas to begin again somewhere smaller. Hale smiled as though he had offered mercy. Clara watched the seal pressed into the corner of the paper. It matched the mark on the false freight receipts. "You knew about the shortages before the storm," she said. Hale looked at her for the first time. His gaze traveled over her broad frame, muddy hem and rolled sleeves. Unlike Harlan, he did not mock her. His contempt was colder. "And you are the woman who found them." Something flickered behind his eyes. Silas stepped between them. "You have your answer in 3 days." Hale gathered his papers. 3 days will not improve your position." "No," Clara said, "but they may clarify yours." He left without replying. For the rest of the morning, Silas said little. He walked the damaged yard, counted the missing cattle, and listened while Joseph described the cut fence and crescent-shaped tracks. By evening, he sat alone at the kitchen table with Hale's offer before him. "If I sell," he said, "the men are paid. The debt is finished. No more wondering whether one bad winter ends everything, and Red Butte gone." Clara sat across from him. "Do you want it gone?" "I do not trust what I want." His hand tightened around the paper. "I trusted Harlan for 5 years. I handed him the part of this ranch I was too tired to manage. He nearly destroyed it." One wrong man does not make every judgment wrong. It makes the cost of being wrong harder to ignore. Clara leaned forward. "You built this place. You hired me when you had every reason to send me away. You listened when I told you the men were breaking. You went into a blizzard for them. Those were judgments too." Silas looked at her. "Do not sell because shame has made fear sound sensible," she said. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Margaret Alden arrived beneath a gray traveling cloak, carrying a lawyer's notice and 20 years of grief. She was Robert Alden's older sister. Robert had been Silas's partner before fever killed him 2 years earlier. Margaret claimed Robert had owned nearly half of Red Butte. Silas's account placed his share far lower. "If her claim holds," Silas said, after Margaret retired to the spare room, "Hale will not need my permission. I will have to sell." Clara examined the notice. The attorney's name meant nothing to her, but the office address did. It appeared on one of Hale's freight documents. "He found her," Clara said. Silas frowned. Hale learned there was an old dispute. He placed a lawyer in front of a grieving woman and let her believe he was protecting her brother's memory. Margaret was mistaken, perhaps, but not dishonest. That made the truth more difficult and more important. Clara gathered everyone in the kitchen. Joseph would search Robert's old line shack. Lottie would ride to her freight station and send word through her contacts in Miles City. Ben and Amos would speak with men who had witnessed Harlan signing deliveries. Silas would open every box of letters Robert had left behind. Clara would rebuild the accounts. For 2 days, Red Butte became a place of searching. Joseph returned near midnight on the second evening, carrying a rusted tin box. He had found it beneath loose boards in the old line shack. Inside were letters, partnership notes, and a written warning in Robert's hand. The Yellowstone Cattle and Land Company had been approaching indebted ranchers for years. Robert believed it intended to weaken independent operations through freight contracts, false credit, and inside agreements. Another letter stated his exact ownership share. It matched Silas's account. At dawn, Lottie arrived with records showing that Harlan had received payments through a freight broker controlled by Hale's company. The truth no longer depended on suspicion. Clara arranged the evidence across the kitchen table. When Hale returned, Margaret was waiting beside Silas. Hale entered smiling. The smile disappeared when he saw Robert's letters. Clara presented the freight receipts first, then Harlan's signatures, the broker payments, Joseph's evidence from the cut fence, and Robert's warning. "You cannot prove I ordered sabotage," Hale said. No, Silas answered. "But I can prove your company paid the man who did it while using information only he could have supplied." Margaret lifted her brother's letter. "You used my grief to force a sale." Hale's face hardened. "I informed you of your rights. You informed me of the rights that served you." She turned to Silas. "I was wrong about the amount. I will accept what Robert's papers establish, no more." Silas nodded. "You will be paid fairly." Hale closed his case. "You are choosing debt over certainty." "I am choosing my ranch," Silas said. The men watched Hale ride through the gate. Red Butte was not suddenly prosperous. The cattle were still scattered, the fence broken, and creditors remained. Silas told the men everything, no false promises, no softened numbers. He offered them honest wages, clear accounts, decent food, and a voice in the recovery. They stayed. Joseph became livestock foreman. Ben was placed over the young horses. Amos moved to harness work that spared his knee. Lottie arranged a new freight route through people she trusted. Weeks later, a letter arrived for Clara. The woman from the Denver household confessed that her husband had falsely accused Clara after she rejected his advances. Clara's name had been cleared. Silas read the letter with fury gathering quietly in his face. Clara took it back. "I carried his lie far enough." She opened the stove and laid the pages in the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and disappeared. Silas waited until the last edge became ash. Then he placed a formal agreement on the table. It gave Clara authority over supplies, household operations, and ranch accounts. It included wages they would negotiate together and a share of future profits. "Stay," he said. Clara read every line. "Because the ranch needs a cook, because Red Butte needs you. That is not enough." His expression did not change. She continued, "I will not belong here only as long as you feel grateful. My place must stand whether affection grows or fails." "It will." She looked directly at him. "I will not stay because you rescued me. I will stay because we built something neither of us could have built alone." Silas extended his hand. "Equal partners, equal." She took it. Only after the agreement was signed did his fingers close more gently around hers. The first soft snow of winter came at dusk. The men gathered in the kitchen. Joseph sat among them as foreman. Ben spoke eagerly about a young mare. Amos rested his leg near the stove. Lottie remained for supper. Clara removed a pan of biscuits from the oven. Above the table sat her mother's recipe tin. Beside it lay a new notebook with Clara Redbird written across the cover. She opened it and wrote, "Make more than you think they need. Hunger is not always found in the stomach." Silas stood beside her. Outside, the fences still needed mending, and the debt would take years to clear. But the fire was warm. The books told the truth. The cattle were returning, and no one at Red Butte Ranch was waiting for sunrise so he could ride away.